So tonight we're going to go over the basics on form modeling. Now, so far we have been working more dimensionally, driven components, meaning we've been drawing sketches, those could be whatever it is, but we've been largely using things like extrude and that sort of thing that is a single dimensional change, meaning it's taking the extrude and going straight up in the Z axis. Or yes, we've made some playing around with uh, making the revolve tool, which still just spins around the Z axis, that sort. Very much solid dimensional modeling. What we're going to start doing is we're going to start playing with the sculpting environment, essentially, the form modeling. Unlike the modeling we've been doing so far, which is, again, very much based on single dimension extrusions, things like that, we're going to be working with instead more of like a sketch in 3 dimensions. Now, what do I really mean by that? Well, and I do have these notes I'm going to put up, but Fusion is very much based around T-spline modeling, and I'm going to share my screen for a moment, just some notes that I have set up here, so you can look along as well. Sorry, head was getting stuck on that. There's two different main types of modeling, and yes, there's one called NURBS, which is non-uniform rational bias spline. I don't even bother remembering the term. It's fine. But things like CAD software like Rhino 3D and SolidWorks, these very much work on NURBS modeling. It's the shape of the surface is determined by control points. So think of, it's not necessarily the points on the surface itself, but it's non-visible points floating out in space. So different thing. That's how it goes. Fusion 360 works off of T-splines. It's much more mathematically driven for making freeform spaces. And a T-spline, like it says here, it's a surface type of a network of control points, which are, again, the same kind of thing, but these are shown directly on the model. Think of, essentially, this is a fit point spline across a 3-dimensional surface. So far, fit point splines, we have been making points, and it draws a curve between those points, and you can manipulate that. Surface modeling, or sorry, specifically what we were doing is going to be working with the form tools. So form modeling is doing that same thing, but for the entire surface. So you have the option of controlling single points or having more of a collective effect. So T-splines, think of the entire surface, and I'm going to move the screen over here. Think of it in terms of like a big fishing net. So you have your edges, you have your vertices, which are the knots between the lines, the edges being not the outside edge itself, but all of the actual lines of a net. And the faces are the space between. So let me change the screen for a moment and show you all what I'm talking about. Just as a visual reference here, y'all can see. Arise, screen, arise. So you have, and you can kind of see this. I know I'm going to show you some more direct models, but essentially you have 3 major elements to a T-spline model or form modeling. If you're looking at this as like a big fishing net, something like that, all of the lines themselves are the edges. Helps if I can spell that right. There we go. Jam a D in there. Edge, not edges. Those are all the lines themselves. The connection points, and that includes the corners, are vertices. A vertex is a single vertex. Faces themselves are the spaces between these. So all of those, oh man, that is terrible handwriting. So all of the space between the edges are faces. T-spline modeling allows you to push and pull, manipulate by any of these choices, or you can use all of them essentially. But when you move a fishing net, or if you're more of a science major or anything like that, think of like, the whole concept of like space being like a big, like think of like how Einstein describes gravity wells and such. Think of space as a big sheet, and something heavy pulls down in the center. So you have the whole big space, but more of in the center, everything starts to droop down, that sort of thing. We're not talking about, we don't need to worry about like space time or anything like that, or wormholes, any of that kind of stuff. We're not playing with that. But it's just more of that all of that can move down, and you can drag multiple points in a single direction with kind of varying degrees of control. In other words, it's kind of like clay sculpting. You're not moving like a little tiny point, you're trying to move larger amounts, but you do have very fine control if you so want it. So what that kind of means, and more of like with note style here. Sorry, and I'm also juggling screens and projectors and all that kind of thing. Be awesome to have one of those old-timey lecture halls where you have all of the different screens you can move around. Anyway, basically we've been working with solids. That's what those are, solid forms. It's not just the outside edge. It's you're treating like, as we've been making like, revolves, if you've been making extrusions, all that stuff, it's essentially a solid form. It's a solid blob. It's a solid shape. Keep that kind of mental visual in your head. Surface modeling, and while it's not technically a surface, it is surface modeling, that sort of thing. That's just different vocabulary. Form modeling, surface modeling, in this sense, we're going to kind of use them interchangeably. You are working more with organic shapes. You're not making sharp angles and such. You can make sharp angles. You can crease edges and things like that. Sorry, I'm pointing to the thing that's behind the screen now. But you are doing much more organic moving of elements. You can control single little points, single vertices, but you can move those in a much more organic way. Like I said, it's more like clay sculpting rather than like cutting or something like that. Form modeling, you can just work much more freely. Form tool environment works very similarly to the sketch environment, meaning that you have to enter the workspace and then finish the form, that sort of thing. Same thing with like the sketch workspace. You don't have a timeline within the sketch workspace. Once you finish the sketch workspace, you can add different features, things like that. But what that means is you're also going to have a bit of a limitation for going back and forth in time with this project, with these projects that we're going to work with for this. Meaning that you can still, control or command Z or Y to forward and back within a single session, but you want to make changes as you finish stuff. Once you exit the workspace, the form workspace, those will be locked in. Yes, you can go back and re-enter the form workspace, just like you can go back and re-enter the sketch workspace, but you don't have the benefit of a timeline within the sketch environment. You can still make changes, but you don't have the timeline like with all our other Fusion projects. So again, this and the other stuff just break down the vertex, just where two edge lines meet. And that can be cross, point, whatever. Timeout. An edge are any of those lines. It says straight line, it's a line. It's just lines between a point. Those don't necessarily have to be a straight line, like a fit point spline that could be curved. And the face is basically the polygon within that edge, meaning that it doesn't always have to be four edges and four vertices. It could be more or less that sort of thing. So polygon is multiple, more than one, more than two, really. So faces can have as many vertices, but only polygons having a shape of three or more really vertices can be made into subdividing surfaces, meaning you can even chop up those faces further for finer detail, but we're gonna deal with those. So let's go into Fusion so we can actually see some examples of what I'm talking about. And sorry, I thought I had this pulled up already. So I'm going to start a new project here, and And working in the form environment, you can start with sketches, things like that. You can continue to work, but this little gumball with like a blast on it, that is the create form. Just like create sketch, this is the create form tool. So like it says, enters the form mode, and you can work with any of the features within that. But it is going to be an isolated thing on the timeline. So you're not going to have the benefit of the timeline working with this. But use these form tools to create edit free-form bodies. That's what it means. You're like sculpting. You can push, you can pull, you can extrude. It's not a direction. It's not a harsh extrude. It's a soft extrude, meaning like pushing into a blanket or something. You're not making a direct like straw shape. If you're just pushing a finger through a blanket, or into a blanket rather, it's not going to be like a cylinder being extruded. It's going to be like the shape of your finger with kind of a loose cone coming off of that. Again, it's T-spline. It's called T-spline modeling. If I haven't noted it before, the reason why it's called T-spline, the edges make T's. That's literally all it means. It's just that, like, at the edge makes a T. That's it. Where two edges and meet at a vertex, it's a T shape. So if you're mildly curious, so let's start something. Create form. Just like with working with sketch, your toolbar changes, but you have a lot of the same sort of tools. You have a sketch environment. You can create things from sketches, but for the most part, we're going to be starting things from pre-generated shapes. So you have a box, you have a plane, you have a cylinder, you have a quad ball, and a sphere. Difference between those: sphere is like a globe. You have longitudinal and latitudinal lines that all meet, or that latitudinal latitude. There we go. Yeah, longitudinal lines, vertical. Yeah, I always get those confused still. Meet at the North and South Pole. Quad ball is more like a soccer ball. It's technically it's a spherical square is really how it actually is defined or whatever. But you also you can create planes, which, like the example, a plane is a two-dimensional thing with edges and vertices and faces. Or you can create even just by individual faces. So you got a lot of options. Obviously, you drop down, you got even more. You got your pipes, which is the same thing we just used the pipe tool to make. You can now make sculpted ones. Torus, a donut, same. And you can still have a variety of the similar tools: extrude, sweep, or revolve, sweep, and loft. Only if you notice the difference on these, they're now made up of a bunch of segmented faces and such, through the segments being edges and such. We're going to be able to play with all this kind of stuff. So ultimately, the whole lead up was, we've been doing a lot of these dimensionally driven things. Now we can add to those, we can revisit those same tools in a different way. But let's play with just some basic shapes here. Let's start with a box, which, as you can see, is not exactly a square box. It's like a soft pillowy box. Same thing as making a cube, cylinder, same. But let's start with a box. Pick a plane, pick a spot. It's a center rectangle, so it starts at the center, you build outward from there. Select one. If you hit enter, it changes to, now I add my height. And you can see, obviously, got a lot of options here. Now, when it comes to sculpting, keep it simple and then add complexity. What you have is your basic set of faces being top, bottom, front, back, left, right, but those are already segmented into 4 faces each. If you look over here, and really what that means, it's called by 2 because it's half and half. You can add or subtract through either the toolbox. So let's say 3. You can see that now it adds more. 34. Oh, wait, way too many. But you can add and subtract these either dimensionally or with the slider, less, more. So down to 1, you can see 1 is more of just that single face, even though it's 2 tall, or 2 faces tall. So you can add and subtract, but the more complex you make it right at the get-go, the more difficult it is to work with. But let's just leave it at that. There's a little bit of differentiness. Now, you do have directions, of course. You can make this symmetrical on both sides. We're going to leave it as one-sided. Now, you do have symmetry. You can apply symmetry across length, width, or height, or all of them. But for now, let's leave it at none, and we'll explain how I can do that later. All right, so you got your basic thing. The create section is just for creating shapes. Get us a starting point. From there, and what I should have done to begin with, let's save. Example, form space, oops. Can't spell tonight. Intro. All right, form space intro. There we go. Okay. From here, from your establishing point, this is where you go into modifying. Now, you have your basic ones up top, which are the ones we're going to probably be using the most. Form edit is going to be the one we use probably the most. And because this is, like it says, manipulating faces, edge, and vertices with transform, scale, and rotate. What that means, transform is like moving them around space. But because it's not a separate thing, the rest of the object partially follows. Scale, still the same, larger, smaller. Rotate, exactly what it means, turning those faces and such. You have different selection options. Insert edge is, like it says here, exactly what it sounds. Your edges are the lines. You can add more lines. And thicken is when you have just a surface or so. You can see how that goes. And you're seeing some familiar shapes here, kind of looks like the detergent bottle we just played with. That wasn't accidental. And as you can see through the drop down, there's a whole lot of options. We are going to play with we're going to explain some of these tonight, but what I encourage you to do, play, experiment, and play. There's no homework tonight, aside from, doing some catch up. That's on you. But I am going to, if we have, nope, we don't have time tonight. So I'm just going to walk you through a few of the tools. I encourage you to play. So the most important one we're going to work with here at edit form brings up a new toolbox. You have your T-Spline entity is just you're selecting. That's what that means. You're just selecting. Transform mode is you can isolate things. So you can either have all of your options at your disposal at any time, or you can isolate them. So you're just moving, you're just rotating, you're just scaling. Your space, same deal, how you move through space. Your selection filter by default is you have all options available to you. So I can select a face. I can select many faces. I can select edge. If I double click, it'll select the entire edge until it hits a face change. Or I can select by vertice, just a single vertices. Or say if I scroll or if I orbit over, I can use the selection box, and now I'm selecting all the things. But if I isolate my vertex, now you can see the little points show up. Now I can either select them individually, or if I move, I can use a selection box, select all of them on that line. That's what that means. Edges, I can only select by edge. Face, I can only select faces. I can't select anything else. Last one down is you just select the whole body. And that's just for kind of like moving and scaling. But let's just play around a little bit. So let me introduce you to like I just refer to it as the gimbal. So when I select anything, all of my options come up. So this is where it's asking you to isolate transform options. So right now, all the things are there, including by distance, moving by distance. So let's isolate some things. Translate. That is just moving around. But the reason it says translate instead of move, because they want to be different. No, what happens is, as I move this up, you can see how the whole form moves around with me. So you can really immediately see the difference in how things operate with this. You're pushing, you're pulling, you're moving around, all that stuff. The arrows are just orthogonal directions. I'm only moving in the x-axis, or only in the y-axis, or only in the z-axis. The squares, however, allow you to pan. So this one allows you to pan around X and Z, the other Y and Z. So you have some limiting factors because you have a 2D input. You have a mouse. It moves around on a flat surface. You're trying to manipulate a three-dimensional object with a two-dimensional input. So just like we've been playing with, that makes some things kind of awkward. But there you go. So we can move this all around, all over the place. Drag it all out. Okay. Let's try by rotation. All right. Well, now you have obviously the rotators. You mouse over, you see the whole orbit. Orbit sometimes does some weird things. Rotate sometimes does the weird things. Rotating around the Z-axis, around the Y-axis, around the X-axis. That's all. Ooh, look, I'm making kind of swing back and forth. Last option is scale. Scale works on, you see these little lines? When I select the horizontal line here on top, you can see, and unfortunately, the gimbal icon doesn't get larger as I zoom in. It stays the same size. But this is a non-uniform scale. Scales up or down. Might be more effective to see if I select a few multiples here, so a few faces. So as I scale up, you can see how that whole thing, just what I'm selecting, scales up and down. If I select the vertical line or here, the horizontal, really it's just the side line here. It scales left and right. Non-uniform scales. However, if I select the curve, it moves in both X and Y. Or sorry, in this case, it's both Y and Z. To do uniform scale, mouse over the center, and you see the three triangles appear on all sides of that circle. That is my uniform scale. And again, it functions off of numerals. So 0 to 1 is 1 is current scale, 0 is less, and then multiples beyond that. So there you go. So that's scale. And rotation and orbit. But if I have all of them, you can see how it kind of gets a little overwhelming to try and introduce you to all of them at once. So that's your modifiers directly. However, you got some more hotkey versions. So things like if I select a couple faces, I can drag outward. But if you press and hold Alt, it actually extrudes. It's a soft extrude. It's not a direct extrude. Press and hold Alt, now move. See how it's actually adding lines. It's not just moving the thing without pressing and holding. It just stretches it, making an extra long Twinkie. But, see, it's not adding any faces or anything like that. But when I press and hold Alt, it actually creates a new edge there and then moves outward. So you can very quickly see how you can start with a simple shape and then start manipulating it. We'll go giant and then Alt move. You can very quickly just start generating shapes out of nothing. A really excellent tool to play with. You have a bunch of other options down here, and we're being thorough with this edit form because it has a lot of options. You have some drop downs. You have object snap. That's if you're relating it to a different object. We don't right now, so there's nothing there. Below that is soft modification. Now for this, I have to have vertices active. Drop down here, nothing's active. Select the checkbox. What this does, and let me change to off of the color view to appearance view because it's gray. So Shift N, and it's gray, so you can see the lines appear a little bit more effectively. Right now, I don't have. Deselect anything. All right, nothing's there. You have some options. The extent means the distance that is effective at. Or rather, your selection. Distance means actual linear effectiveness. Face count, it's by faces. How far away is faces? And then rectangular face count is just kind of straight across. Then you have your transitions of how smooth, or it's more of a direct line, or it's more of a bulge, so it's more curved outward. Great. What the hell does all of that stuff mean? What it means is I can select by vertice, and now that I've selected just that vertex, look at this red line that's now appeared. It's very red, close to the vertex, starts to kind of shift out pink, and then white, and then it's just black, nothing selected, these lines out here. That is the effective range, or right now it's by distance. You can select this by face count, so it selects by how many faces away. These are the effectiveness. So now as I move, rather than it dragging that whole thing with me, it's going to alter the effect strongest at that point of selection and diffuse the selection away. So this is a way to make softer transitions. Again, this is why I'm telling y'all to just experiment with this stuff. So as I move this all kinds of out, it's not moving everything at once. So let me deselect that and show you a comparison. Deselect the soft modification. I'm going to select like over here. It is only going to affect that one point mostly, and then it drags the rest. You see how sharp a point that ends up with? Whereas over here, I had soft modification selected, select that vertex, I have that effective line going out. So now it's only limited to this line here, this edge, but that's because it's by distance. I could go by face count and it'll go a lot further. Right now, you can make the changes there. But now, as I move just that one vertex in a couple directions, see how everything else moves with it? Much softer, a soft modification. So that's the difference. If you can use a soft modification to pull things around and such, and just have it more of spread the effectiveness across the surface, or uncheck that and let's drag this one upwards this time. Or you can make really sharp points by deselecting it and moving stuff out. So you can get some really weird stuff going. Okay, super duper. There's more selection options. We're not going to even bother with any of this stuff right now. I just wanted to show you soft modification and, of course, numeric inputs. That's just, instead of using the arrows and dragging your mouse around, by number points. So, yeah, let's not bother with that right now. Okay, hit OK. There we go, locks it in. Now, I've made a whole bunch of changes. Nothing has changed on my history slider. It's only so far been that one form. Let's start something else so I can show you mirror and such. Say, like, let's use a sphere here. And let's just make that somewhere out here. There we go. Let's make it a lot larger. Apparently 1,000 or 1,200 millimeters. Fine. Same thing, I hit enter before I, let me step back. I hit enter before I finished it. There we are. So same deal. You have your options for longitude faces, latitude faces. If you want to make it simpler, dial it back to like 4. You can see what happens when I select 4. It takes it more from a sphere to kind of like a lumpy ball. So really, not 66. 6 and 6 is usually about the simplest you want to go. Anything smaller than 6 tends to do messy things. Obviously, yes, you can do like 5. You don't have to do, they don't have to match. These can be 5 and 20 for all I care. But see how 5 still kind of flattens out the sides? I usually go with 6. 8 is certainly functional, but just works better. Now again, symmetry. I can play with this, but I want to show you how to add it after the fact. Symmetry on a sphere makes a lot more sense when it comes to like things like mirror and circular, but I'm going to play with this in a moment. I don't really want to get into that right now. Okay, so you got the same. Great. It's a sphere. You get the idea. Now, I have 2 bodies, but it's still just the one form on the timeline because I haven't finished form. I haven't done anything. This is all essentially the same way as a sketch environment works. There you go. All right. So we got the form. We got the ball here. We got the sphere. Cool. Now I do want to play with symmetry to show you. So I have drop down. You have some options. There's 6 different options. The last one's being get rid of symmetry, or you can just play with a single one. So that way you can have symmetry on, and it's kind of like a toggle. Anyway, let's focus on the first 4. Mirror is exactly what it means. You have one side, and it does the same on the other. Problem with a sphere like this sphere, sorry, as opposed to quad ball, you select a couple faces, and then it draws the mirror line between those faces. So there, I selected 2 faces there, and it draws a mirror line across the latitude. But say I select top, and they don't even have to be adjacent to one another. Across there, it does a longitudinal one. I think I got those backwards. Let's just say it's around the equator. So they don't have to be adjacent. It just finds a mirror point between the two. So mirror internal means it's mirrored between somewhere in the center. Okay. The other symmetry, circular mirror. This obviously applies well to spheres. Select one face, and now it's wanting you to select any number of them, and it says 2, 3, and 6. What does that mean? There are 6 faces. If I select opposing, it's going to put a mirror line across right there. If I select instead what would be a 3-sided one, you can see how it subdivides the surface across 3 lines. Or obviously, if I do 6, that's symmetry on all sides. So let's leave it at 6 and play with from there. Okay, so right now it has mirror applied to everything, and I'm just going to hide that first object so we can play with this. All right, so the green lines mirror. Okay, it's mirroring like all the things. Great. Edit form. Let's pick a face, and you can leave it by all selection if you want, or just by faces. All right. Now I'm going to move this just as one face, and let's pan this away. Now they're all connecting, but look, as I twist and move this, it's changing a lot of stuff. But because I have so much symmetry applied, it's going to throw in things. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Alt and move. So press and hold Alt and drag out. Now it's making symmetry, dragging that one face, but because it's making the whole thing symmetrical, it's making all the things move in different directions. Pretty cool. So now, without pressing Alt, now I'm going to pan this up or to the left. So you can, again, you can see how you can very, very quickly start to make some real weird shapes. You can rotate this stuff. You can continue to extrude. You have all these more faces to play with. Press and hold Alt. Ooh, just did something weird there. Don't do that. I don't know what I did, but don't do that. Trying to extrude some things outward. There we go. So you can make some very strange things with playing with symmetry. What if I want to get rid of symmetry? Say, okay, you know what? I don't like what it's doing now, or now I want to make changes to individual ones. That's where you can go to clear symmetry, takes the whole thing off, or make Control Z so it goes back on to symmetry back on. Isolate symmetry. What do you want to get rid of? Cross that one? Yep. Okay, let's just take just that symmetry off. So now I should be able to make some alterations just that surface. See, it didn't change all the other ones, but now all the rest is still movable. So the red panels, those are the ones that I can move individually. But if I select something else, say like just the tip again, oh, now it's isolating everything from everything. Fine, jerk. Anyway, it's isolated stuff. It was supposed to maintain that. So you do sometimes have to toggle stuff back on and on. Anyway, you can play around with this stuff a lot. Now, again, there's so many more you can play with. Main things being like, I just want to show you a couple of the quick ones, like what happens if you delete a face or a couple, whole arm. Recedes back, and it kind of defaults to a hole. If you need to fix that, you can either obviously undo it, or maybe you go to Edit Form and select just by edges. Double click that edge. Now I can even move just that edge out. If I need to, I can extrude that, just that edge, press and hold Alt, and I basically make like a tube, a cylinder coming off of that. So you can still continue to work with this. It's basically more like a pipe. You can rotate these, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Play around. If you delete faces and need to fix something, like close that up, go to modify, hole fill. It already had those edges selected. So what that means is just double click on that edge, collapse them all. You have some options. You have this reduce star, fill star, collapse. It's not really making much of any changes, but the one other thing here is that you could make it creased. So if I want to keep that last thing sharp, you can do that. Anyway, lots of strange things. What we're going to end up doing with this is we're going to make some utensils. We're not going to get into this tonight, but essentially we're going to make some basic utensils and modify from there. So we're going to give something that's close enough, but there we go. But at the moment, I encourage you to just experiment with this stuff. Just play around in the space, see what it can do. If the thing crashes, there you go. Because the last step on that is you go to finish form. If you have made something too extreme or things overlap one another, it will give you an error. Like so. T-Spline failed to convert. What that means is I probably had something that's overlapping, and it's going to tell you edges or faces may be crossing. Review in box mode. All right. So let's show you how to deal with that. What that means, and it looks like, yep, right there. See how these edges are kind of really messed up? They're actually showing you in it's showing you in two different colors. That's because they're overlapping. They're occupying the same space. So what it's saying in box mode, this is a way that you can toggle how the thing looks and kind of simplify the shape. So this top one, the default display mode, it doesn't actually change your form at all. Selected the whole thing. Display mode as a cube. It's just a different way it mathematically showing it. So what it's showing me right here, see how it is overlapping, making this weird shape? There you go. So let's hit OK, go back to edit form, and all I need to do is my points, let's just drag some of these out of the way. So down and around, just so things aren't overlapping as badly. So that might even be enough right there. Let's hit OK, go to finish form. There we go. So I just needed to fix that overlap a little bit. That's all. So again, if you run into those kind of errors, I'll show you how to fix it. But for now, play. Just play. Make up some shapes, make some changes to them. See what it can do. You can do some really weird things. Final thing is, again, no additional details on the timeline. It's just still occupying just that one form. From here, I can then go and add other things to it, modify it, whatever you want. But for now, if you want to add more forms, do that. You can also always go back in, just like for sketches, right click, go back to edit feature. You're right back into the form workspace. If this visual is throwing you, go back to utilities, play with these other visual methods, smooth. Oh, I didn't select the thing. There we go. And there you go. Now you're back to making it all roundy. So play around with it, see what it comes of it. Range forms. And if you run into trouble, that's okay. All right, play around with it.